You have been working in a big corporate and you have been working now as a VP of engineering in names and faces. So coming to the topic that you want to share with us today, which is about onboarding new software engineers. As part of this topic, first of all, what are some of the things that are critical for onboarding a new software engineer coming to the company?
Let me go back a bit and say, let's start at why do people recruit engineers? So when you recruit an engineer on your team or you recruit a couple of engineers on your team, your goal is that once they're on your team, they're as productive as they can be, as fast as possible, so that the team starts pushing out more things. And you get your value back because you're paying this engineer for the work they're doing, and you get your value back from them in the output that they're producing. So one of the key things, or one would think one of the most important things, is once you've hired someone and you've gone through the whole hiring process, you don't just end there and put someone in a room and say, hey, go ahead, now start working. You actually want to make sure from their first day on, you give them the smoothest entry into your company and help them and assist them in as many ways as you can to become productive as fast as possible. So then coming to that, what I look at is what makes someone a good engineer. And in my mind, there's three areas that make someone a good engineer. One is their understanding and capability with tools and technologies, programming languages and frameworks, and all the supporting technologies that you use at your company. They need to be good at that and really great at that. Then there's the domain knowledge, which is understanding what the business is about and how it relates to the technologies we're writing. How does the business make money? How does the business function? And how do we sell? What's our product and what are we building? And then surrounding those two is, in my mind, soft skills, because software is mostly often about collaboration. So we're mostly working in teams. It's rare, yes, you have it, but it's rare to find people who are working in isolation, especially if it's a big enough product or a bigger company. It's usually in teams. So you're collaborating with engineers on your team, perhaps with engineers on other teams. Maybe they've built the API and you're doing the front end and you need to interact with them. You're also collaborating with people in other departments that are not technologists, and you need to be able to communicate with them in a non-technical way so that they can understand what you're dealing with on the tech side. And then perhaps you may interact, depending on your company, you may interact with users. So there's so many things around soft skills and managing communication and facilitating and everything that comes to that. So those are the three key areas in my mind. It's like tools and technologies, the domain knowledge, which is understanding the business, and soft skills. Underneath each of those three things that you can do when you're onboarding someone that can help them learn each of those areas, and you can help them fast track their knowledge and gain in that area. So if we go back to tools and technologies and say, how do you help an engineer who's just started have context of your tools and technologies? And again, if I go back to tools and technologies, it could be, let's say your organization uses JavaScript as its main programming language, and you use React as your framework, you use Git, your code is in AWS in the cloud. There's so many tools and things around that. And when someone first joins, one of the things that's important to do is, as quickly as possible, try to get them to make real changes to the code base. And the reason behind this is, even if it's such a small change as just changing the copy on a page, on a view or something, or just changing the text, they need to do that. They need to be able to check out the code base onto their local machine. So then they start to learn about your source control. Where does your code live? How do I get into the machine? How do I get it running on the machine? Because they need to run tests and everything on your machine. So they need to also learn how the tests run. After they've finished writing change, making that change, they will need to push up the code, and then it gets pushed to some build servers. So what runs our build servers? How does the code then get from his machine or their machine to a staging environment and to a production environment? So then they also see how the structure is of the code coming from their local machine back up. So it exposes people to the full flow of their code by just asking them to make real changes to the code base as quickly as possible. So that's the first thing that I would encourage. And if you can get it to happen on the first day, that is a great thing. Some people wait a long time until they're actually able to push a change. The other practice would be pair programming. I would encourage new engineers to pair program with existing engineers that were on the team before. This helps on multiple aspects, with the main one being just gaining context and someone being available to answer questions for you when you get stuck. Someone who can navigate the code base, can explain exactly what's happening and where things are. And then also you get to know your teammates a bit more by pair programming with them. Ideally, you want to pair program with different people on the team. So you rotate so that they get to know the rest of the team. And also you want to rotate who's actually doing the driving on the pair programming, So sometimes the new person helps them with their familiarity. Sometimes they're also just watching you drive and they learn like the different tricks that you have and your understanding of your code base. Also, if you have any onboarding documentation, that would be useful for helping people onboard on the tools and technologies. If there's any documentation that's written somewhere else that allows people to quickly read and say, oh, I understand that's how the build systems work, or even if it's on a GitHub repository of how to set up the code base and how the architecture is structured, that could be useful. The important thing with documentation, as always, is to make sure it's always up to date, because sometimes it can be more confusing if it's not updated. And if the new person finds that some documentation is out of date, you should encourage them to be the ones who update it. So every new person always makes sure we are on the latest version of how we are structured. And then the final thing on tools and technologies is, as a company, perhaps keep a list of resources that people can use for learning. So whether it's books or online courses or blog posts that are tied to the technologies you use, it can really be beneficial for someone who's new to learn, oh, I need to learn JavaScript. What are the resources I need to look at? Then you can just point them to some list that you have. And if your company has a good training budget or a good budget, if you can create a training budget for all your software engineers to allow them to purchase these books and courses from the company's finances as opposed to their own, it's also very beneficial because then it encourages them to learn a bit more. So I'd say those are the 4 on the technical side: making real changes to the code base, pair programming, onboarding documentation, and some learning lists or learning resources that are backed with a training budget that comes from the company.